Greetings, Sagittarius and Sagittarius rising. This is your Western forecast for June 2024. One of the big themes is marriage, partnerships, contracts, negotiations, or really focusing on expanding your customer base. The big reason is Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, I'm sure I talked at length last month, went into Gemini at the last week of May 2024 and remains in Gemini until into June, the beginning of June 2025. Jupiter is expansion, prosperity, and when it moves into Gemini, Gemini is opposite Sag. The Gemini is ruling your seventh house of marriage, partnerships, contracts. The Jupiter is bringing lots of opportunities. Jupiter can also bring in a release. So if you're in a really difficult, challenging, frustrating partnership professionally and personally, some of you could be released from the contract. That could be the Jupiter. The other big theme is joint ventures, which could go along with business partnerships, because the Mercury, Venus, and Sun, which I'll explain a little bit more, will be going into your 8th house. And the 8th house deals with shared values, joint ventures, your financial obligations with others. Now, before I break all this down, if you enjoy these kinds of videos and would like to see more of them, click like and subscribe. And don't forget to click on the notification bell so you can receive the latest postings. And if you go into the description box underneath the video, you'll find direct links to book an astrology reading or check out my 2-question offer. Now, every year, the end of May, the first 3 weeks of June, the sun is in Gemini, opposite Sagittarius. So wherever the sun is shining is where your attention is being very drawn to. Now, every June, there might be other themes that are impacting you other than relationships, because there's other planets that could be making a stronger emphasis in your chart. But in general, these first 3 weeks of June, the spotlight of the sun is on partnerships and contracts and marriage and negotiations. Mercury, negotiating, curious, talkative Mercury is going to be really strong because it's in Gemini also. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, so there's a lot of this business savviness or being able to really communicate and get your ideas across. The first 2 weeks of June, the Mercury is also in Gemini in your 7th house. Lots of discussions about 7th house matters. Venus, the planet of love, of compromise, of peace, of harmony, will be in Gemini the first 2 weeks from the last week of May through the first 2 weeks of June. Venus can bring in some cooperation if there's any tension in relationships, but Venus wants to attract. It's the power of attraction. So you could fall in love. If you, it can help resolve any if you're in a long-term relationship, any problems. That Venus is the peacemaker. It's always seeking compromise and harmony. But then Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, for the next 12 months, once every 12 years, will be in Gemini in your 7th house. As I've said many times, Jupiter seeks knowledge. It wants to teach, it wants to travel, it wants to expand one's horizons. It's very philosophical. My point is, Jupiter isn't a romantic love energy. It's a more intellectual energy. It wants to search for greener pastures. That's the Jupiter. And so it's not about relationships. However, once every 12 years, when Jupiter moves into the 7th house of relationships, if you've been in a relationship, because Jupiter alone is not bringing you a relationship. But if you've been in a relationship, dating, could be dating for years, or if you met somebody in this past year, the Jupiter can often indicate a marriage. Or if you're more alternative types, buying a house together, but not legally getting married. Because Jupiter also represents justice and the legal system. And that is why Jupiter, which is not a romantic energy, can also indicate a potential getting married when it moves into the 7th house of marriage. Now, the Sun will leave Gemini on the 20th of June and go into Cancer for 4 weeks. Cancer is 8 signs past Sagittarius. So now the Sun is starting to spotlight 8th house. That could be dealing with loans and taxes and joint ventures. Mercury, in the middle of June into early July, will be in Cancer. The Mercury, especially in the 8th house, is very business savvy with negotiations with that 8th house of finance, of joint ventures. Venus will also be in Cancer the last 2 weeks, going into early July. And the Venus brings more compromise, brings in more protection and luck around negotiating financial matters. On a completely different level, the 8th house is where we look to for sexuality, and Venus, that planet of love. So once a year, when Venus is moving through the 8th house, the last 2 weeks into early July, there could be a stronger desire for intimacy. If you've been in a relationship and it's been getting kind of dull and routine, that Venus can inspire more intimacy. If you're meeting somebody for the first time, especially with all these planets in the 7th house of relationships, Sun, Mercury, Venus, the first half, but then Jupiter, bringing in all this optimism with relationships for 1 year, then the Venus in the 8th of sexuality and all these planets in the 7th. So if you were to meet somebody new, the Venus in the 8th would be a strong physical attraction, but you would want more than just sex. You would want much more of intimacy. Now, the new moon on June the 6th will be at 16 degrees of Gemini. There's 30 degrees in a sign. So it's putting a real emphasis, drawing your intentions with all forms of relationships, professional, personal. Venus, the planet of love and harmony and cooperation, on the day of the new moon at 16 Gemini, Venus will be at 16 Gemini. If Venus didn't have any other modifications to it, it would put the new moon, drawing all of our attentions for the next 4 weeks on all things Venus, love and harmony and creativity. Unfortunately, taskmaster Saturn, it'll be in a hard angle to Venus. That 8th house, where the Venus, the new moon, that 8th house also can represent intimacy and very intimate relationships that with the Saturn are being tested and could be fighting over money. That's the 8th house of joint ventures, because also Mars, warrior Mars, will be transiting through the 7th house of partnerships. 2 weeks after the new moon is the full moon on the 21st. So a day or two, a day before, a couple of days afterwards, is when that full moon could be triggering a lot of emotional reactions. It's at 1 degree of Capricorn that falls in your 3rd house of sales, negotiations, interviews. It's that 3rd house of meetings and ideas. It's going to be opposite Mercury and Venus. Opposite is the interacting in negotiations and discussions. With Mercury, could be all these negotiating, lots of discussions. With the Venus, it's bringing in this compromise and more peace, so things don't get too crazy. But with the full moon in the 3rd house and the Mercury Venus are in the 9th house, the 3rd house, 9th house are opposite each other. So they're two sides of the same coin. 3rd house, 9th house axis has a lot to do with education, selling, learning, marketing. So that's what's going on. And maybe that's the time around the 21st that some of you might be deciding to go back to school to learn astrology or psychology. Now, with that Mars in the 7th and the new moon in the 8th, that could really reveal secrets. If you or your partner is lying or cheating, it's all going to come out, and it's going to really test a relationship, no kidding. But the Mars in the 7th could be the fighting, but it could also be clearing of the decks. And lastly, which I think I've mentioned, the 8th house is the house of death, transformation, legacies. And having Jupiter once every 12 years in the 8th house can bring inheritance, can bring financial windfalls and gifts. And then I mentioned lotteries. It's that 8th house are these financial gifts. Jupiter, I would, to win the lottery is like the chances of being hit by lightning twice, But if you don't play, you don't win. And for Scorpios and Scorpio rising in general, for the next year, that Jupiter in your 8th house could be some unexpected lucky winnings, or maybe getting an inheritance, or maybe if you're applying for a loan or a grant, you're more prone to get it. I want to thank you for watching. If you like information on how to book an astrology reading or check out my 2-question offer, visit my website at gardino.go. That's .co. Until next month, be safe and well.